They say history remembers kings, emperors, and nations, but what it often forgets is what a human heart becomes after it's been pushed past its limits. Revenge is not born in a single moment. It's carved slowly through humiliation, injustice, and betrayal. Tonight, you are not just listening to stories. You are stepping into lives where ordinary men and women were cornered so brutally that revenge wasn't a choice anymore. It became the only language left. And some of these people, they didn't just take revenge. They changed history with it. This is the true story of the most epic revenge acts in the US, UK, and Canada. Not myths, not legends. Real events. Real consequences. Real people who decided enough. Story 1. United States. The man who waited 20 years. It was 1857 in rural Missouri, the kind of place where justice traveled slower than winter. The air smelled like dust and corn, and a young boy named Silas Hodge lived with his father, a quiet farmer with hands rough from years of work. One evening, after a land dispute with a wealthy businessman named Reeves Dalton, Silas's father was found dead near the creek. The sheriff called it an accident. Everyone else whispered murder. Silas didn't whisper. He memorized the killer's face. Dalton was rich, powerful, connected. No court would ever touch him. He knew that. Silas knew it too. But the boy grew, and so did the rage. 20 years later, Silas was no longer a poor farm boy. He had traveled across states, worked railroads, mines, lumber camps, saving every dollar, building a new identity. The country changed around him. Civil War had ended. The West was opening up. But one thing didn't change. The face he saw every night before sleeping. Dalton.
By 1877, Dalton had become a respected landowner with political ambitions. Newspapers described him as a pillar of the community. Silas leaned back in a dark alley reading those words, the paper trembling slightly from the laughter he couldn't hold back. He returned to Missouri after 2 decades. Nobody recognized him, not even Dalton, who hosted a grand town celebration for his re-election campaign. He stood on the stage, confident, powerful, untouchable. Silas moved calmly through the crowd. Some said later they saw him smiling. As the celebration reached its peak, Silas approached the platform, pushing through people politely. When he reached the front, Dalton leaned down, friendly as a politician, offering a handshake. Silas took his hand, pulled him close, and quietly whispered the last words Dalton ever heard. "You killed the wrong man's father." A single shot echoed through the hall. Dalton collapsed instantly. Silas didn't run. He didn't hide. He simply sat on the steps and waited for the sheriff, finally at peace. When the townsfolk asked him during the trial why he did it, Silas answered only one sentence. "I waited 20 years for justice. That's patience, not murder." The jury deliberated for 5 minutes. He was acquitted. Story 2. United Kingdom. The Cambridge Betrayal. In 1921, Cambridge University was a world of crisp uniforms, strict discipline, and people who believed rules mattered more than emotions. Among them studied Eleanor Walsh, a brilliant young researcher in chemical sciences. But brilliance isn't enough when you're a woman in a world run by men who fear being outshined. Eleanor had discovered a new formula for a stabilizing compound, something that could change industrial chemistry. She documented everything, prepared her thesis, and shared her findings with her research partner, Professor Harold Kent, a man respected by everyone, feared by his students, and trusted by no one. One winter morning, Eleanor entered the university hall to see newspapers displaying a shocking headline. Professor Harold Kent announces revolutionary chemical breakthrough.
Her formula, her years of work, stolen. Her name nowhere. Her contribution erased. When she confronted him, he simply said, "History remembers names it can pronounce. Yours isn't one." Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't break. She simply stared at him with a calmness that scared even Harold for a moment. Over the next year, Harold Kent rose to fame, earning awards, influence, and wealth. Meanwhile, Eleanor worked silently, pretending to accept defeat. But she was building something else. A trap. Her stolen formula had one flaw, a flaw Harold didn't know existed. The compound began destabilizing after months of exposure, causing a chain reaction that would corrupt every experiment based on it. Exactly 14 months after Kent's triumph, the prestigious Royal Chemical Exhibition invited him to showcase his discovery. It was the biggest event of his career. Eleanor attended as a quiet spectator. Kent demonstrated the compound confidently, unaware that the flaw Eleanor built into it was now reaching its critical phase. As he mixed the components in front of hundreds of scholars, the reaction spiraled out of control. Not an explosion, something worse. It fizzled, failed, and collapsed into sludge. In front of the entire scientific community, his revolutionary discovery fell apart like wet ash. People gasped. Newspapers roasted him the next morning. His career died that day. Eleanor walked past him as he sat outside the hall, defeated, holding the ruined sample in his shaking hands.
She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply said, "You stole my future. I only returned the favor." Her real paper was published a year later, under her name. Story 3. Canada. The Loggers' Last Stand. The forests of British Columbia in the 1970s were not peaceful. They were battlegrounds between corporations, locals, indigenous communities, and workers who lived by the axe and died under falling trees. Among them worked Martin Hale, a loyal, skilled logger who had spent 18 years working for North River Timber Company. He wasn't educated, wasn't wealthy, but he was respected for his integrity. One winter, during a cost-cutting overhaul, the company fired dozens of workers with no compensation. Martin, who had lost 3 fingers in an accident while saving another worker, was among those dismissed. Worse, the company refused to cover his medical bills, claiming he was negligent. He begged. He pleaded. But corporate greed has no ears. As his life collapsed, debts rising, family falling apart, Martin watched the company thrive, clear-cutting ancient forests, poisoning rivers, and expanding operations. Something inside him died. Something else replaced it. Revenge. Martin used his years of expertise and knowledge of the terrain to orchestrate the most sophisticated sabotage in Canadian environmental history. One night, at 3 a.m., he walked deep into the forest, carrying tools he'd used his entire life. He reached the base of the company's largest operations, massive skidders, bulldozers, and log loaders worth millions. He didn't destroy them violently. He dismantled them precisely. He cut hydraulic lines, removed essential bolts, disabled ignition systems, all without leaving fingerprints. Machines that looked untouched were in reality corpses. When workers arrived at dawn, nothing started. The company's biggest project collapsed overnight, costing them nearly $2.5 million.
Reporters called it the Phantom Logger. Police never caught him. Years later, when Martin lay on his deathbed, he admitted his actions to his son with one final whisper. "They took my life first. I only took their money." Story 4. United States. The Woman Who Burned the Mob. Chicago, 1934. A city run not by laws, but by fear. Maria Alvarez, a widow from Mexico, worked in a small clothing shop. Her brother, a quiet man named Diego, got tangled with a local mob faction by accident. They wanted protection money. He refused. They taught him a lesson he wouldn't survive. Maria buried him alone. No police helped.
Nobody dared. She cleaned the blood from her doorway with her own hands, and in those hours, a quiet seamstress became a storm. Maria spent months learning everything about the mob's operations, warehouse schedules, shipment routes, guard patterns. She befriended workers, offered food to homeless people who slept near the docks, bribed a janitor, slipped notes into pockets. No one suspected the gentle woman who bowed her head while passing gangsters. And then one night, she acted. Using leftover alcohol from the shop's storage, she created a perfect accelerant mixture. She waited until the mob's largest illegal storage warehouse, packed with stolen goods, was full. At 2:12 a.m., a spark lit the building like a sun. Flames devoured everything. Losses? Over $8 million in stolen goods. A criminal empire crippled. Mob influence in the South District destroyed for a decade. Maria was never caught. Rumor says she watched the fire from a bridge, tears on her cheeks, not from fear, but from the memory of her brother. A quiet voice escaped her. Now, you burn.
Story 5. United Kingdom. The Clockmaker's Vengeance. In 1810 London, time ruled everything. Factory whistles, street lamps, royal schedules, and nobody understood time better than Jonathan Steele, a master clockmaker known for precision unmatched in Europe. He crafted timepieces for nobles, scientists, even members of parliament. And for that, he was envied. His rival, Gregory Shaw, conspired with corrupt officers to accuse Jonathan of theft, a watch stolen from a duke. With no evidence except forged testimonies, Jonathan lost his shop, his title, his customers. In one night, he went from master of time to a man forgotten. He disappeared for 2 years. People assumed he died. But revenge doesn't die. It simply ticks quietly. Jonathan returned quietly under a different name and approached Gregory, who by then owned the finest clock shop in London. Jonathan offered him a gift, a magnificent grand clock, flawless and intricate. Gregory accepted, unaware of the trap ticking inside. The clock contained a hidden mechanism, a delayed release geared disruption system. Over time, it miscalibrated every watch Gregory produced, shifting gears by micromillimeters. Weeks later, the wealthy elite returned, furious. Their watches failed, their appointments ruined, their trust shattered. Gregory's reputation collapsed rapidly. By the time he discovered the cause, it was too late. His entire inventory was worthless. Jonathan confronted him outside a pub where Gregory stood in the rain, business destroyed. Jonathan's voice was calm. I stole your hours. I stole your future. Gregory never rebuilt his shop. Jonathan never reclaimed his name. But history remembers which clockmaker truly mastered time.